The Grand Conclave was the largest space station ever built. It floated at the center of the Milky Way galaxy like a metal flower, its petals stretching across thousands of kilometers. Inside its massive halls, representatives from over 4,000 alien species gathered to discuss the future of the galaxy. They called themselves the Galactic Assembly, and they had been meeting like this for over 50,000 years. Captain Park Do-yoon stood near the back of the observation deck, watching the endless debates below. His uniform was crisp and clean, the blue fabric of Earth's space navy pressed to perfection. He was a tall man with tired eyes and steady hands, the kind of soldier who had seen enough battles to hate war, but enough injustice to keep fighting anyway. Beside him stood Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho, his communications officer. Tae-ho was younger, barely 30, with quick fingers that danced across holographic displays like a musician playing an instrument. He monitored dozens of transmission channels at once, filtering the noise of 1,000 alien languages into something useful. "Another trade dispute," Tae-ho said quietly, nodding toward the central chamber below. "The crystallines want exclusive mining rights in the Outer Rim. The Thuvians say that violates the Treaty of Shared Resources." Do-hyun made a small sound of acknowledgement. He'd been stationed at the Grand Conclave for 2 years now, commanding the escort vessel that protected Earth's diplomatic delegation. In that time, he had watched countless debates just like this one. The alien races loved to talk. They formed committees to discuss forming other committees. They debated the proper wording of proposals for months before voting on whether to consider them. Humanity had joined the Galactic Assembly 60 years ago, after scientists on Earth finally cracked the secret of faster-than-light travel. In the grand scale of galactic civilization, 60 years was nothing. The Thuvians had been spacefaring for 12,000 years. The crystallines had existed for twice that long. To the elder races, humans were children playing with dangerous toys. Ambassador Yoon-jia walked up to join them, her formal robes flowing behind her like dark water. She was Earth's representative to the Assembly, a woman of 50 with silver streaks in her black hair and a face that revealed nothing she did not want it to reveal. She had spent her entire adult life studying alien cultures, learning their languages, understanding their ways of thinking. The other ambassadors respected her, even if they did not respect her species. "The Thuvians will win this one," Jia said, her voice calm and measured. "They always do when it comes to resource treaties. The crystallines know this. They are simply positioning themselves for the next negotiation." 3 months of debate for a bargaining chip, Do-hyun said. "Seems like a waste of time." Jia smiled slightly. "Time means different things to different species, Captain. The Thuvians live for 800 years. To them, 3 months is like 3 days to us. They do not understand why humans are always in such a hurry." Specialist Choi Yoon-ji joined them a moment later, carrying a tablet filled with translation notes. She was the youngest member of the senior staff, only 26, but her skill with languages was unmatched. She could speak 14 alien tongues fluently and understand dozens more. Her job was to catch the subtle meanings that automated translators missed. "Something strange is happening," Yoon-ji said, her brow furrowed. "The Valorian delegation just received an emergency transmission. They have gone completely silent." The Valorians were one of the founding species of the Assembly. They looked somewhat like tall birds, with feathered bodies and large eyes that could see in complete darkness. Their homeworld was ancient and beautiful, covered in vast forests that had grown for millions of years. They were known as peacekeepers, mediators who helped resolve conflicts between other species. Do-hyun felt a small twist in his stomach. Emergency transmissions were rare at the Grand Conclave. Most problems were discussed calmly over years or decades. Something that required urgency was almost unheard of. The answer came moments later. A massive holographic display flickered to life in the center of the assembly chamber. Every conversation stopped. Every eye, every sensor, every alien organ of perception turned toward the image forming in the air. It was the Valorian homeworld. Seen from orbit, ships were burning. The image showed massive vessels emerging from dark space, from the emptiness between stars where nothing should exist. They were black and angular, covered in sharp edges that seemed to drink in light. Thousands of them poured through the void like a swarm of metal insects. A voice spoke over the transmission, crackling with static and fear. It was a Valorian emergency broadcast, translated automatically into every language in the chamber. This is High Sentinel Veth of the Valorian Defense Network. Unknown hostile fleet has entered our system. Orbital defenses are falling. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Requesting immediate assistance from all assembly members. Please, please help us. The transmission cut to static. For a long moment, the Grand Conclave was silent. 4,000 species stared at the empty space where the image had been. Then, slowly, the chamber erupted into chaos. The crystallines demanded more information. The Thuvians called for an emergency session to discuss response protocols. A dozen other species began arguing about jurisdiction, about treaties, about whose responsibility it was to respond. Do-Hyun watched the chaos with growing disbelief. People were dying. Right now, at this very moment, the Valorians were being slaughtered, and the assembly was arguing about procedures. He turned to look at Ambassador Gia. Her face had changed. The calm mask she always wore had cracked slightly, showing something harder underneath. Something determined. How long until the assembly authorizes a response? Do-Hyun asked quietly. Gia's jaw tightened. Days, possibly weeks. They will need to form a committee, debate the composition of a relief fleet, negotiate which species will contribute forces, and how command will be shared. And the Valorians? Gia did not answer. She did not need to. They both knew what would happen to the Valorians while the assembly debated. Hours passed. The arguments continued. Proposals were made and rejected. Committees were formed and dissolved. Species accused each other of cowardice or aggression. Through it all, the holographic display occasionally flickered back to life, showing more images from the Valorian system. More burning ships. More destroyed stations. More death. Do-Hyun stood with his hands clenched at his sides, watching the greatest civilization in the galaxy do absolutely nothing while one of its founding members died. Beside him, Lieutenant Taiho whispered, "Sir, I am receiving transmissions from other human vessels in the sector. They are asking what we are going to do." Do-Hyun looked at Ambassador Gia. She was staring at the holographic display, watching another Valorian defense platform explode into fragments. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "what are we going to do?" Gia was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to face him, and her eyes were burning with something that looked almost like rage. "We are going to do what humans have always done, Captain," she said. "We are going to help." Ambassador Yoon Gia stood up from her seat in the middle of a crystalline diplomat speech. The alien was talking about the proper chain of command for emergency military operations, his body glowing with soft blue light as he spoke. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the human rise. "Ambassador Yoon," the crystalline said, his voice echoing strangely through his mineral body. "You are interrupting official proceedings. This is highly irregular." "Yes," Gia said simply. "It is." She turned to face the rest of the human delegation. There were 47 of them scattered across the chamber, scientists and diplomats and military officers who served Earth's interests at the Grand Conclave. They were watching her with knowing eyes. They had all received the same private transmission she had. They all knew what she was about to do. "Earth delegation," Gia announced, her voice clear and strong. "We are leaving. The humans rose as one. It was not coordinated, not planned in advance. It simply happened, like a flock of birds taking flight at the same moment. 47 people stood up from their seats and began walking toward the exit. The assembly fell silent. Elder Thrak, the ancient Duvian who served as the assembly's senior counselor, raised one of his many limbs in confusion. His species looked somewhat like purple trees with too many branches, and they had led the assembly for over 8,000 years. In all that time, no delegation had ever simply walked out of an official session. "Ambassador Yoon," Elder Thrak said, his voice rumbling through translation devices. "What is the meaning of this? We are in the middle of emergency deliberations. Your departure is a violation of Protocol 7, Section 12, which clearly states that all member species must remain present during crisis discussions until a formal adjournment is declared." Gia paused at the doorway and turned to face him. "Elder Thrak, with respect, your protocols can wait. The Valorians cannot. But we have not yet formed a response committee," another alien said. This one, a member of the gelid species, beings of living ice from a frozen moon. "We have not authorized military action. We have not even confirmed the nature of the threat." "We know the nature of the threat," Gia replied. "Someone is attacking our friends. That is all we need to know." Captain Park Do-hyun stood beside her, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. He was not expecting violence, but old habits were hard to break. Behind him, the rest of the human military personnel formed a loose protective formation around the civilian members of their delegation. "Apa!" Valorian representative pushed through the crowd, her feathered body trembling with emotion. Her name was something unpronounceable in human tongues, but the translation device rendered it as Singer of Morning Light. She was young for her species, barely 200 years old. "Humans," she said, her voice breaking. "Where are you going?" Do-hyun met her large, dark eyes. "To help your people." But that is impossible," Singer said. "Valoria is 3 weeks away at standard travel speeds. Even at maximum faster-than-light velocity, it would take you 2 weeks to arrive. And you have no authorization from the assembly. No support fleet, no." "We know," Gia said gently. She reached out and touched the Valorian's feathered shoulder, a gesture of comfort that crossed species boundaries. "We know it is far. We know it is dangerous. We know we might not make it in time. But we are going anyway." Singer stared at her with something that looked like wonder. "Why? Why would you do this? You owe us nothing. We have offered your species nothing but dismissal and condescension since you joined the assembly. Why would you risk your lives for us?" Gia smiled sadly. "Because you need help. That is reason enough." The humans left the chamber. Word spread quickly through the Grand Conclave. By the time the human delegation reached the docking bay where their ships waited, every species in the station knew what was happening. Aliens lined the corridors, watching in silence as the humans walked past. Some looked confused. Others looked angry. A few, mostly the younger members of various species, looked at the humans with something that might have been admiration. Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho walked beside Captain Do-hyun, his fingers flying across a portable communication device. "Sir, I am receiving messages from every human vessel in the sector. They want to know what is happening. Tell them to prepare for immediate departure," Do-hyun said. "All ships, military and civilian alike. Anyone who can fight, anyone who can help, anyone who wants to come. We are going to Valoria." "Sir, that is a lot of ships. Cargo vessels, research stations, mining platforms. Most of them are not combat capable. Then they will evacuate survivors. They will provide medical support. They will do whatever they can." Do-hyun's voice was hard. "This is not about winning a battle, Lieutenant. This is about being there when it matters. Within the hour, something unprecedented happened. Every human vessel in the sector broke from their assigned positions. Military cruisers and tiny shuttles, massive cargo haulers and sleek research vessels. They all turned toward the same coordinates and engaged their faster-than-light drives. The space around the Grand Conclave lit up with the blue glow of human engines pushing toward maximum velocity. The assembly watched in stunned disbelief. "This is madness," Elder Thrak declared to the emergency council that had finally formed. "The humans have no battle plan. They have no unified command structure. They are rushing into a combat zone with civilian vessels and inadequate weapons. They will be slaughtered." "Perhaps," said a young Thuvian counselor who had been watching the human departure with strange intensity. "But they are going. They are actually going. They are violating 17 protocols," a crystalline representative said. 17. "We could sanction them. We could expel them from the assembly." "We could," Elder Thrak agreed. "But somehow, I do not think they would care." Across the galaxy, news of the human response spread like fire. Every species with faster-than-light communication heard the story. The young, primitive humans, members of the assembly for barely 60 years, had abandoned the safety of political debate to rush toward a war that was not theirs. Some called them fools. Some called them heroes. Most simply watched in horror, unable to understand why any species would risk so much for strangers. Aboard the human escort vessel Horizon, Captain Park Doyen stood on the bridge and stared at the swirling colors of faster-than-light space. His ship was not the fastest in the hastily assembled fleet, and it was far from the most powerful. But it was his, and he would take it into hell itself if that was what the situation required. Ambassador Yunjia joined him at the viewport. She had changed out of her diplomatic robes and into simple civilian clothing. There would be no more negotiations for her. No more careful words and political maneuvering. She was done with all of that. "The assembly will never forgive us for this," she said quietly. "Probably not," Dahian agreed. "We might die. All of us. Every human who answered the call. Probably." Gia was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Do you think we are doing the right thing?" Dohyun thought about the Valorians he had met over the years. He thought about Singer of Morning Light, trembling with fear in the assembly chamber. He thought about the millions of civilians on Valoria, ordinary people who had done nothing wrong except exist in the path of an enemy fleet. "Yes," he said. "I think we are." Gia nodded slowly. "So do I." The Horizon flew on toward Valoria, surrounded by hundreds of other human vessels. They were not an army. They were not a fleet. They were simply people who had decided that they could not stand by and watch others suffer. Behind them, the cosmos watched in horror and wonder, trying to understand what kind of species would do such a thing. The journey to Valoria took 12 days at maximum speed. 12 days of flying through the strange, swirling void of faster-than-light space. 12 days of preparation, planning, and fear. Captain Park Do-yoon spent most of that time in the command center of the Horizon, coordinating with other vessels in the growing human fleet. What had started as a few dozen ships from the Grand Conclave sector had become something much larger. Word had spread across human space, and people were answering the call. "Sir, another group just joined the fleet," Lieutenant Kim Taiho reported, his eyes fixed on his display. 14 mining vessels from the Kepler asteroid belt. They say they have welded armor plating onto their hulls and mounted industrial cutting lasers as weapons. Do-hyun shook his head slowly. Mining vessels with cutting lasers against a fleet of warships. "They know, sir. They want to help anyway." That seemed to be the common response. Every day, more ships appeared on the fleet's sensors. colony transports that had dropped their passengers at safe stations before turning around to join the fight. Research vessels carrying scientists who had volunteered to serve as field medics. Private cargo haulers whose captains had loaded up with emergency supplies and medical equipment. None of them had been ordered to come. None of them would be paid. Many of them would probably die. They came anyway. Specialist Choi Yoonji had taken on an unexpected role during the journey. A young Thuvian journalist named Korath had secretly boarded the Horizon before departure, hiding in a cargo container. When he was discovered, Do-yoon had been ready to put him on the first ship, heading back to the Grand Conclave. But Yoonji had convinced him otherwise. He wants to understand, she had said. Let him see. Let him tell the story to his people. Now Yoonji spent hours each day with Korath, answering his endless questions about human behavior. The young Thuvian was barely 50 years old, practically a child by his species standards, and he could not understand what he was seeing. Your ships are not military vessels, Korath said during one of their conversations, his branch-like limbs waving in confusion. Most of them have no weapons at all. Why would civilians fly toward a battle? Yoonji considered the question carefully. They were sitting in the Horizon's small observation lounge, watching the blue light of faster-than-light space swirl outside the viewport. Do you know the history of my species? She asked. Some of it, Korath admitted. You are very young. Your recorded history spans only a few thousand years. That is true. And in those few thousand years, we have experienced many terrible things. Wars that killed millions. Disasters that destroyed entire cities. Cruelty that is difficult to even describe. Yoonji paused, choosing her words carefully. But we have also seen something else. Again and again, when disaster strikes, ordinary people risk their lives to help strangers. They run toward the danger, not away from it. They give everything they have, sometimes even their lives, for people they have never met. Korath's sensory organs flickered in confusion. But why? There is no logical benefit to such behavior. The risks outweigh any possible reward. That is true, Yoonji agreed. It does not make logical sense. But humans do not always operate on logic. We operate on something else. Something harder to explain. She looked out at the swirling void beyond the viewport. We have a saying on Earth. It comes from a very old story. We are going because they need us, and we can help. That is all the reason humans have ever needed. While Yoonji educated their unexpected guest, Ambassador Yoon Jia worked with Captain Do-yoon to coordinate the fleet strategy. It was not easy. They had over 300 ships now, and more were joining every day. Most had no military training. Many had never even fired a weapon. We cannot fight a traditional battle, Jia said, during one of their planning sessions. The enemy fleet is too powerful. If we try to face them directly, we will be destroyed in minutes. Then what do we do? Do-yoon asked. We focus on what we can do. Evacuation, rescue, medical support. Jia pulled up a holographic display of the Valorian system. The enemy is targeting population centers. They want to capture or kill as many Valorians as possible. Our job is to get those people out. We will still need to fight, Do-yoon said. The enemy will not simply let us evacuate survivors. I know. That is why I want the military vessels on the front line, creating a defensive screen. The civilian ships will move in behind them, landing on the surface and at orbital stations to pick up survivors. It was a desperate plan. It assumed they could hold off a superior enemy force long enough to save at least some of the Valorians. It assumed the civilian captains could fly into a war zone without panicking. It assumed a lot of things that might not be true, but it was the best they could do. On the 10th day of their journey, something unexpected happened. A transmission came in from a Valorian military vessel that had escaped the initial attack. The captain was a grizzled old officer named Bright Wings at sunset, and his ship was badly damaged. Limping through space on emergency power. Human fleet. His translated voice crackled over the communication system. We see you on our sensors. We do not understand. Why are you here? Do-hyun took the communication personally. We are here to help, Bright Wings. Tell us what you need. There was a long silence. When the Valorian spoke again, his voice was different, softer. The enemy. They are called the Keth, ancient machines from before recorded history. We thought they were extinct. They emerged from dark space without warning. Thousands of ships. Our defenses fell within hours. How many survivors? Gia asked, leaning into the communication pickup. Unknown. Perhaps millions are still alive on the surface. But the Keth are harvesting them. Taking them? We do not know why. Bright Wings paused. You cannot save them. You cannot defeat the Keth. They are too many, too powerful. You should turn back. Do-hyun looked at Gia. She shook her head slightly. We are not turning back, Do-hyun said. Give us whatever information you have about the Keth. Weaknesses, patrol patterns, anything useful. We will find a way. Another long silence. Then, quietly, Brightwing said, You humans are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Do-hyun admitted. On the 12th day, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light space at the edge of the Valorian system. 347 ships of all sizes and types. Crewed by over 50,000 volunteers who had come to help strangers. They looked at the Valorian homeworld. Burning in the distance, they looked at the Keth fleet. Thousands of black angular ships swarming through the system. They looked at each other. And then, without hesitation, they flew forward into the fire. The first human ship died within minutes of entering the system. It was a small cargo hauler called the Morning Star, crewed by a family of traders who had volunteered to help with evacuations. A Keth patrol craft spotted them and opened fire without warning. The Morning Star exploded in a flash of light, killing everyone aboard instantly. Captain Park Do-hyun watched the explosion on his tactical display. He felt something cold settle into his chest, but he did not let it show on his face. There would be time to mourn later. Right now, there was work to do. All ships, this is Captain Park, he announced over the fleet-wide channel. Maintain formation. Military vessels move to intercept position. Civilian ships stay behind the defensive line until we clear a path. The human fleet spread out across space like a wave of metal and light. 63 military vessels moved to the front, their weapons charging with energy. Behind them, nearly 300 civilian ships waited. Their cargo holds, empty and ready to receive survivors. The Keth noticed them immediately. Thousands of black ships turned away from the Valorian homeworld and began moving toward the human fleet. They moved in perfect coordination, like a single organism with thousands of bodies. Their communication signals were strange, filled with patterns that human computers could barely understand. They are analyzing us, Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho reported, his fingers flying across his console. I am picking up scanning frequencies. They are trying to understand what we are. Let them wonder, Do-hyun said. All weapons, prepare to fire. The battle began. Human weapons were not as advanced as Keth weapons. Human ships were not as fast or as durable. But humans had something the Keth machines did not understand: the willingness to sacrifice. The military cruiser Defiance took the first major hit, a Keth energy beam cutting through its port side. Instead of retreating, the Defiance's captain, a woman named Han Soin, turned her damaged ship directly toward the attacking vessel. She rammed it at full speed, destroying both ships in a massive explosion. Defiance is down, someone reported over the communication channel. Captain Han. She took 3 enemy vessels with her. Do-hyun felt his jaw tighten. Push forward. Keep the pressure on. On the surface of Valoria, Ambassador Yoon-jia led a ground team through the burning ruins of what had once been a beautiful city. She had never fired a weapon in combat before today. Now her hands were steady as she cut down Keth ground units with precise shots. This way, she called to the group of Valorian civilians huddled behind her. There is an evacuation shuttle 2 blocks ahead. Keep moving. The Valorians were terrified. Most of them had never seen violence before. Their society had been peaceful for thousands of years. They did not understand why these strange pink creatures from a distant world were risking their lives to save them. A young Valorian child, barely old enough to fly, clung to Jia's leg. "Why are you helping us?" she asked in a trembling voice. Jia picked up the child and kept moving. "Because you need help," she said simply. That is what humans do. Above the planet, the battle raged on. Specialist Choi Yoon-ji had taken over communications for the fleet, coordinating rescue operations while Lieutenant Tae-ho focused on a different task. He had discovered something interesting about the Keth. They communicated through a central network, sharing information and coordinating their movements through a complex web of signals. "If I can hack into their network," Tae-ho said, his eyes never leaving his display, "I might be able to confuse them. Send false data. Make them think we have more ships than we actually do." "Do it," Do-hyun ordered. Tae-ho's fingers danced across his console. For 3 long hours, he fought a silent battle against the Keth computer systems, probing their defenses, finding weaknesses, exploiting gaps in their programming. The Keth were ancient machines, but they had not encountered human creativity before. They did not know how to deal with an enemy who thought in patterns they could not predict. Finally, Tae-ho broke through. "I am in," he announced, a fierce grin spreading across his face. Sending false signals now. The effect was immediate. Keth ships began moving erratically, responding to threats that did not exist. Their perfect coordination faltered. Gaps appeared in their formations. "All evacuation ships, move now," Do-hyun ordered. "Get to the surface while we have the opening." 200 civilian vessels dove toward the planet, their pilots pushing their engines to the limit. They landed in burning cities and damaged orbital stations, throwing open their cargo doors and loading survivors as fast as possible. The Keth realized what was happening and began to respond. A massive dreadnought, larger than any other ship in their fleet, turned away from the planet and headed directly toward the largest group of evacuation vessels. If it reached them, it would destroy dozens of ships and kill thousands of survivors. Do-hyun saw it coming. He made his decision in less than a second. "All crew, prepare for impact," he announced over the horizon's internal communication. "We are going to ram that dreadnought." His bridge crew looked at him with wide eyes. None of them argued. None of them tried to stop him. They simply began preparing for what might be their final moments. The horizon accelerated toward the Keth dreadnought, pushing its engines far beyond their safe limits. Warning lights flashed across every console. The hull groaned under the stress dot at the last moment. Do-hyun ordered all non-essential crew to the escape pods. Most of them went. Some stayed at their stations, refusing to leave. The horizon struck the Keth dreadnought at full speed, driving itself deep into the machine's command section. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface, a flower of fire blooming in the darkness of space. The dreadnought's coordination network went offline. Dozens of Keth vessels suddenly lost their connection to their central command. They began moving randomly, crashing into each other, firing on empty space. In the chaos, the evacuation ships escaped. Do-hyun woke up in an escape pod, floating through the debris of his destroyed ship. His body ached. His vision was blurry. But he was alive. Through the pod's small viewport, he could see the human fleet still fighting, still protecting the evacuation vessels as they carried survivors away from the dying planet. He had done his part. The rest was up to them. The battle continued for another 6 hours. More human ships were destroyed. More lives were lost. But the evacuation continued, shuttle after shuttle rising from the surface, loaded with Valorian survivors. When the last human ship finally left the system, they had saved over 2 million lives. The cost was 847 ships destroyed. Over 12,000 humans dead, but they had done what they came to do. They had helped. The Galactic Assembly's official peacekeeping fleet arrived 3 days after the human evacuation. They came with over 5,000 warships, crewed by soldiers from dozens of species. They came with advanced weapons and careful battle plans. They came with the full authority of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations. They found the Keth swarm in disarray. Lieutenant Kim, Taiho's hack into their coordination network had done more damage than anyone expected. Without their central command system, the ancient machines had turned on each other, fighting internal battles that made no sense. The combined might of the assembly fleet swept through them in hours, destroying what remained of the threat. But the real victory had already been won. 2.3 million Valorian survivors floated in human cargo ships, scattered across a dozen systems. They were safe. They were alive. Because ordinary humans had decided that strangers were worth dying for. Captain Park Do-hyun spent 2 weeks in a medical station, recovering from injuries he had sustained when the Horizon was destroyed. His ship was gone. 60% of his crew was dead. But every day, Valorian survivors came to visit him, bringing gifts and speaking words of gratitude that translation devices could barely capture. "You saved my family," a Valorian elder told him, tears streaming from her large, dark eyes. "My children live because of you. My grandchildren will know your name. We will never forget what humans did for us." Do-hyun did not know what to say. He had not done it for gratitude. He had not done it for fame. He had simply done what needed to be done. Ambassador Yoon-jia returned to the Grand Conclave 3 weeks after the battle. She was exhausted. She had lost friends. She had seen things that would haunt her dreams for years. But she walked into the assembly chamber with her head held high. The chamber fell silent as she entered. 4,000 species watched as the human ambassador took her seat. The same seat she had abandoned weeks ago when she led her delegation's dramatic departure. The same seat that had marked humanity as a minor, unimportant species for 60 years. Elder Thrak, the ancient Thuvian counselor, rose slowly from his place at the center of the chamber. His branch-like limbs moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had seen thousands of years pass. "Ambassador Yoon," he said, his voice echoing through the vast space. "The Assembly has reviewed the events at Valoria. We have analyzed your species' actions. We have attempted to understand your motivations." Gia waited, her face calm and unreadable. "Your fleet violated 17 protocols," Elder Thrak continued. "You departed without authorization. You engaged in military action without Assembly approval. You risked civilian lives in a combat zone. By every standard we have established over 50,000 years, your actions were inappropriate, dangerous, and wrong." He paused. The chamber held its breath. "And yet," Elder Thrak said softly, 2.3 million Valorians are alive because of those actions. The Keth threat was weakened by your attack before our fleet arrived. You sacrificed your lives for species who had never shown you kindness or respect." His sensory organs flickered in what might have been confusion. "We do not understand why you did this." Gia stood slowly. She looked around the chamber at the thousands of alien faces watching her. Then she spoke, her voice clear and strong. Elder Thrak, I cannot explain why humans do what we do. I can only tell you what we believe. She took a breath. We believe that life has value. All life, not just human life. Not just the lives of our friends or allies. Every thinking being in this galaxy matters. Every person who suffers deserves help if help can be given. She looked at the Valorian delegation, who were watching her with expressions of deep emotion. We did not help the Valorians because we expected reward. We did not help them because we had calculated the benefits and costs. We helped them because they needed help, and we could give it. That is the only reason we have ever needed. That is the only reason we will ever need. The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, something remarkable happened. The Valorian delegation rose to their feet. Then the young Thuvian journalist, Korath, who had returned to his people with stories of human courage. Then members of other species, one by one, standing in acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. Within minutes, half the assembly was on their feet. Elder Thrak watched this unprecedented display with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. When the chamber finally quieted, he spoke again. The assembly recognizes the human species, he said, and his voice carried a weight it had not held before. Not as junior members, not as primitive newcomers, but as equals, as partners in the great work of building a better galaxy. Specialist Choi Yunji, who had accompanied Jia back to the Grand Conclave, felt tears forming in her eyes. She thought about the 12,000 humans who had died in the battle. She thought about Captain Han Soyan ramming her damaged ship into enemy vessels. She thought about Captain Park Do-hyun sacrificing the horizon to save evacuation ships. They had not died for recognition. They had not died for status. They had died because helping others was simply what humans did. But it was nice that the galaxy finally understood. Years later, historians would look back at the Battle of Valoria as a turning point in galactic history. They would write about how a young species, barely 60 years into their interstellar journey, had taught the ancient civilizations a lesson they had forgotten long ago. They would write about how the cosmos had watched in horror as humans rushed from the assembly, unable to understand why anyone would run toward danger instead of away from it. And they would write about how that horror slowly transformed into something else. Wonder. Respect. Hope. Because if one small species could care so much about strangers, perhaps there was hope for all of them. Perhaps the galaxy could become something better than it had been. Perhaps the future could be brighter than the past. All it took was the courage to help someone who needed it. That was the human lesson. That was the human gift, and the cosmos would never forget it.